Hi there, my name is Isabel Rowe. After 14 years of building my own vineyard, I came home to find my mother and brother had erased my name from my father's land, selling it off like I never existed. The night they called me selfish, I realized the truth. Sometimes the real danger hides at the family table behind polite smiles. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and thanks for being here. I grew up in a place called Glenmore, Kentucky. Population 1,700 if you counted livestock. My family lived on the edge of town, in a farmhouse with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch no one ever sat on. My mother, Carol, ran that house like a tight ship. Chores had schedules, emotions had rules, and love had prerequisites. She had 3 kids, Bryce, Fiona, and me, but you'd never know we came from the same blood. Bryce was the crown jewel. Everything he touched was potential. Fiona was fragile, always a breath away from being coddled. Me? I was the middle one, the helpful one, the one who learned how to stay out of the way without being asked. Bryce was 2 years older, loud, charming, already preaching to church walls by age 12. He could crash my bike and get praised for surviving the fall. I could win a spelling bee and get told, "Don't gloat, Isabel." He learned early how to perform for applause. I learned how to vanish without making noise. Carol called it balance. I called it being benched in my own life. My father, Raymond, was a man of few words and fewer confrontations. He worked the vineyard my grandfather started. 7 acres of Concord grapes behind the house that barely turned a profit, but gave him purpose. He didn't hug, didn't raise his voice. But when I followed him into the field after school, he let me hold the pruning shears. He showed me how to feel the weight of a ripe cluster in my palm, how to test the sugar by instinct. He never said he believed in me, but he never told me to go away. I remember one storm season when I was 10. Rain was pelting down hard, and the drainage system behind the vineyard backed up. My dad had thrown on his coat and boots, about to go out when I slipped mine on too. Carol told me to sit down, that it wasn't girls' work. But Dad looked at me, then at the storm, and just nodded. We spent hours redirecting water, building barriers out of rocks and buckets. By the end, I was soaked and shivering, but I'd never felt more solid. That night, he placed a mug of tea in front of me, the plain white one with the chipped rim that used to be my grandmother's. "You earned that," he said. He never said it again, but I never forgot. When I was 17, I got accepted into a summer winemaking internship in Sonoma County. It wasn't fancy, just 6 weeks at a small family-owned winery, but it was enough to crack the world open a little. Carol said no, flat out. Said I needed to stay and help Fiona prep for her SATs, as if Fiona ever lifted a finger for anyone. Bryce didn't say a word, just kept polishing his Sunday shoes, like the house had no temperature. I thought that was it. Dream over. Then, one night, Dad came to my room. He didn't knock, just dropped an envelope on my desk with a Greyhound ticket, a wrinkled $100 bill, and a note that said, "Go see something bigger." He didn't say goodbye, but when I boarded that bus the next day, I saw him standing at the edge of the driveway, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping a keychain with a tarnished brass key. I didn't know what it was for. I just knew I had to make that trip count. That summer changed everything. I learned fermentation, soil chemistry, barrel aging. But more than that, I learned what it meant to be seen for your skill, not your gender, not your place in the family, just your hands and what they could build. I came back in August with dirt under my nails and a taste for freedom. Carol met me at the station, didn't say a word during the ride home. When I walked into the kitchen, Bryce was sitting at the table flipping through a Bible, and Fiona was crying over a chipped nail. I stood in the doorway with my suitcase still in hand, and Carol looked up and said, "You missed family dinner. Try to be less selfish next time." I unpacked in silence that night, knowing I was already planning my next escape. The following year, I got a scholarship to UC Davis for viticulture. I didn't tell anyone until the week before I left. Carol said I was throwing away a chance to marry well. Bryce said California would ruin my modesty. Fiona asked if she could have my room. No one helped me pack, no one drove me to the airport. But as I zipped my last bag shut, I found something in the side pocket. It was the chipped white mug. No note, no explanation, just placed there like a silent blessing. I never asked how it got in. I just wrapped it in a t-shirt and carried it with me across the country. I didn't call home often, but I kept that mug on every shelf, in every apartment. It cracked once in a move, right at the handle. I glued it back with epoxy and kept drinking from it. People asked why I didn't just get a new one. I always said, because this one survived. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just before sunrise. I was at the vineyard early, checking frost levels with a cup of black coffee in one hand, and my boots still wet from dew. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Isabel," the voice said, "it's Fiona. Dad's gone. No tremble, no buildup. Just impact." I didn't ask how. I didn't ask when. All I said was, "I'll be there tonight." I booked the next flight out of San Francisco, packed a carry-on in 12 minutes flat, and left a note on the kitchen counter for my assistant. I hadn't been home in 14 years. 14. But standing at gate 27, I didn't feel like a grown woman who owned a business and land. I felt like a girl holding a suitcase full of old bruises. The plane ride was quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I just stared out the window and thought about the chipped white mug in the back cabinet of my kitchen, still sitting there, still holding on. Glenmore hadn't changed. Same broken sidewalks, same bakery sign with a missing E, same smell of wet leaves and burnt coffee drifting down Main Street. But the house? It felt smaller than I remembered, like time had pressed it in from the sides. Bryce met me at the porch with a preacher's hug, tight, rehearsed, all shoulders. "Glad you came," he said, like I'd been invited. Fiona peeked out from behind the screen door, face pale, nails bitten down to the quick. "She's in the back," she whispered, meaning Mom. I stepped inside and smelled bleach, the kind of clean that tries to cover something up. Carol sat at the kitchen table like a queen in exile. Hair pinned, lips pressed tight. A black cardigan that looked like it hadn't been washed since Easter. She didn't look up when I walked in. "You're late," she said. No hug, no emotion. Just another entry in a lifelong ledger of disappointment. I didn't reply. I just pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, the way I used to when she'd quiz me on manners while Bryce played outside. On the table was a small silver key, the kind my dad used for his old shed. I picked it up and turned it over in my palm. "He wanted you to have that," Carol said flatly. "Said it was your responsibility now." I flew back for the funeral 2 days later. It was small. The pastor talked more about Bryce's calling than Dad's life. I sat in the second pew while Fiona cried so quietly it looked staged. Mom didn't cry. She nodded, smiled at the right words, waved to the guests like it was a gala. After the service, as people left with covered dishes and pitying eyes, I stayed behind. Just me, the coffin, and the smell of lilies I didn't ask for. I placed the silver key on top of the casket and whispered, "You left me more than this, didn't you?" Later that night, Bryce called a family meeting. We sat in the living room where the cushion still had my dad's imprint, and he laid it out like a sermon. "The land's been neglected," he said. "We'll need to take over full-time now that Dad's gone." I already started the process. Mom and I agreed I'd manage the estate. Fiona nodded like she was trying to keep up. I sat still, my arms crossed. "What estate?" I asked. He smiled. "The vineyard, the house, the land. All of it. It's not worth much, but it's ours." That word hit me like a slap. Ours. Like I hadn't spent the last decade building a vineyard 5 times the size of this one. Like I hadn't studied fermentation while they studied local gossip. "What about me?" I said. Carol looked up then, calmly sipping from a floral mug I hadn't seen in years. "You left," she said. "You chose your path. This one belongs to those who stayed." I stood slowly, steadying myself. Dad gave me the key. He told me this was mine to take care of. Bryce leaned forward, voice low. "And what exactly do you plan to do with it, Isabel? Fly in once a year and pretend you care?" I didn't answer. I walked to the back door, stepped outside into the cool night air, and stared at the vineyard. The vines were wild. The fence was broken in 3 places, but under the moonlight, the rows still looked like a grid of possibilities. I made a decision right there, in the dirt. With the smell of my father's sweat still clinging to the soil, I'd make them an offer. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed to know, once and for all, if this family valued legacy or control. The next morning, I sat across from Carol and Bryce, with a check already signed. I'll buy the land, I said. All of it. Keep it in the family name. You don't have to lift a finger. I'll even put up a plaque for Dad. All I ask is full ownership. No debate, no drama. Bryce blinked like I'd slapped him. Carol narrowed her eyes. That's generous, she said, almost suspicious. I didn't flinch. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to finish what he started. Carol exchanged a look with Bryce, then nodded. We'll think about it. But something in her smile told me she already had. And it wasn't what I wanted to hear. 2 days after I flew back to California, I got a call from my realtor, Shelby. She sounded confused. You'll want to hear this, she said. A broker representing a large wine conglomerate just made a blind offer on a small plot in Glenmore, 3 acres of Concord grapes and an adjacent family home. They thought it might interest you because of the legacy tie. Said the current owners listed it as a family-owned operation primed for acquisition. My stomach dropped. I hadn't listed the land, but I knew who had. I asked Shelby to forward the documents. The sellers' names hit me like a punch. Carol Rowe, Bryce Rowe, no mention of me, no indication I'd ever existed in that story. Just 2 heirs consolidating their inheritance to honor their late father. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because that wasn't just erasure. That was a rewrite, a full fabrication, and they were already halfway through the deal. The next morning, I called the bank in Glenmore pretending to be a buyer. The account manager was too eager. Yes, the Rowe property is currently in a pre-sale stage, but I should mention, the land's still under partial lien due to a personal loan from earlier this year. The sellers have promised full clearance within 30 days. A lien? On my father's land, I pressed. He hesitated. A line of credit was issued in February, he admitted, for renovations to a local business under Fiona Rowe's name. I hung up before he finished the sentence. Fiona had taken out a loan against land she didn't own, using collateral she didn't earn, and Bryce had backed it legally by signing as co-owner. They didn't just try to sell the vineyard behind my back. They mortgaged it before Dad's body was even cold. And now they were selling it again, to pocket whatever was left before it collapsed. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. I hadn't looked at Dad's estate documents in years. Turned out I wasn't wrong, just incomplete. Bryce and Carol had filed a quiet title action 3 months before Dad passed, claiming Dad was no longer competent to manage property. They'd used hospital records, memory tests, witnesses from the church, all staged, all convenient, and it worked. The title was transferred legally, right as my father was being placed into full-time care. I stared at the photocopies in silence. Bryce's signature, Carol's signature, Fiona's initials scribbled on a notarized affidavit. And mine? Missing. Not even a notification. I'd been cut out so cleanly, it looked like I'd never belonged there at all. That night, I sat alone on my porch in Sonoma, holding the key Dad gave me when I was 17. I ran my thumb across the worn brass until it turned warm in my hand. That key didn't open a door, not anymore. It opened a question. What else had they buried with him? The next morning, I packed a bag and booked a flight back to Glenmore. This time, I didn't call ahead. I walked straight from the airport to the county records office and requested everything tied to Raymond Rowe's land since 2018. The clerk squinted at me. You family, I smiled. Something like that. An hour later, I was holding the paperwork they never thought I'd see. Fiona had filed as a co-developer for a wellness spa project, complete with public funding requests and a private loan backed by an inherited agricultural asset. Bryce had attached a letter of good faith from his church, vouching for the family's unity and intentions. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I took the folder, thanked the clerk, and walked out into the parking lot, my pulse steady. They thought they could gut the vineyard, flip it for cash, and move on. They thought I'd be too busy or too proud to look. They were wrong. Back at the farmhouse, I didn't knock. I walked in. Carol was in the kitchen cutting apples like she'd never sliced through a legacy. Bryce was on the porch reading a leather-bound Bible. Fiona was on the couch, scrolling Instagram with chipped nails and a green smoothie in hand. I held up the manila folder and dropped it on the counter. I saw the papers, I said. Carol didn't even flinch. Then you know the land was never really yours. That was the moment, the final confirmation, not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, a decision. made with intent, spoken out loud. You can't take what was never offered, Carol added, slicing into another apple. You left, you forfeited. That was the cost. I leaned on the counter, calm. I offered to buy it outright. I gave you a way to keep it in the family, but you wanted more. Bryce stepped in then, voice low. You don't get to guilt us now. You think money fixes everything. You've always acted like you were better than us because you got out. I tilted my head. No, I acted like I was surviving. You just never thought I'd make it long enough to circle back. Carol dropped the knife into the sink. Don't turn this into a fight. I smiled. It's not a fight, it's a reckoning. Then I turned and walked out, leaving the folder wide open on the counter. Let them see the receipts. Let them panic. The story they were writing was about to change authors. The next morning, I walked into McMillan County Courthouse with a stack of documents under one arm and a ceramic teacup wrapped in bubble wrap in the other. The cup wasn't for anyone but me. White, slightly chipped, with a faint rose pattern around the rim. It used to be my father's favorite. He'd drink weak black tea from it every morning while reading the classifieds. When he forgot my name near the end, he still remembered that cup, still cradled it like it meant something. I brought it with me that day because I needed the reminder I belonged to him too. I filed the petition to challenge the quiet title action on the grounds of medical fraud and inheritance misrepresentation. My attorney, Mark Teller, had lined up the evidence, doctored reports, conflict of interest with the family physician, witness affidavits from Dad's old vineyard workers. We weren't just asking to void the title transfer. We were asking the court to freeze all land-related transactions, including the sale to the wine conglomerate. That meant Fiona's wellness spa fantasy, dead on arrival. Carol and Bryce's family unity statement, under subpoena. Later that afternoon, I drove to the edge of the old Rowe property. The soil was still damp from last week's rain. The grapevines had been trimmed too short. Lazy hands, rushed cuts. They were bleeding at the tips. I knelt beside one of the wooden posts and ran my hand along the vine. They never learned to wait, I muttered. Always too quick to cut, I turned my head. A few feet away, behind the chicken coop, I saw it. One wild strawberry plant pushing through the mulch. Still green, still fighting. I didn't touch it, I just nodded. Back in town, I stopped by Grady's Gas and Grocery. It looked exactly like it did 20 years ago. Still smelled like motor oil and burned sugar. I bought a Diet Coke, a pack of gum, and walked outside. Before I got in the truck, I turned and snapped a photo of the place. The clerk inside caught my eye and waved. I waved back. That photo wasn't nostalgia. It was evidence. Time-stamped, location tagged. Because the moment this went public, and it would, I needed to be able to prove exactly where I was when everything started to fall apart. The next morning, I received a message on Facebook from a woman I hadn't seen since high school. Lydia Barnes. She was one of Dad's former employees. Said she'd heard I was back in town. Said she had something I needed to see. We met at a diner off Route 12. She looked tired. Her hands were red from years of vineyard labor. She didn't waste time. Your father didn't sign those documents willingly, she said. He told me he felt like they were pressuring him. Said Bryce showed up with a pastor and a friend from the court. Said it felt more like a threat than a choice. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a photo. My dad sitting on the porch, holding that same ceramic cup, with Lydia standing beside him. The date was scrawled in blue ink. April 14th, 2020, 2 weeks after the title transfer. He knew what they did, Lydia said, but he thought keeping quiet would keep peace. I stared at the photo, my hand tightened around my coffee mug. He was wrong, I said. Later that day, Fiona posted a story on Instagram from a rooftop spa in Austin. She tagged a brand called Verde Ritual. I tapped through the slides, branded towels, herbal cocktails. A caption that read, "So proud of this journey, from farm girl to founder. Grand opening soon." My throat clenched. Farm girl? She hadn't watered a plant in her life. She once said the vineyard smelled like wet sadness. But now she wore it like armor, like costume. That night I printed every post, every hashtag, every trademark application under her name. I organized them in a binder, labeled it Fiona Rowe, Public Misrepresentation. Then I added one more page, An invoice for the same spa property, listing the Glenmore land as primary collateral. My name wasn't on it, but it would be. The next morning, I received a cease and desist letter. It came from Fiona's new attorney in Dallas. Accused me of harassment, slander, and undue emotional interference. I smiled reading it. Because if they were lawyering up, they were scared. If they were scared, they were sloppy. And if they were sloppy, I had time. Time to escalate. A few days later, Carol called. No greeting, no small talk. Just, I heard you've been going around town digging up old ghosts. It's not a good look, Isabel. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, neither is forging power of attorney while someone's sedated. But I guess taste is subjective. She hung up. That night, I poured myself a glass of Dad's Reserve, sat on the porch, and listened to the wind move through the vines. I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I just waited. Because the more noise they made, the closer I was to the fracture. The next morning, Mark called. We've got a hearing date. 2 weeks. I asked him. Are you ready? He said. I've been ready since they broke escrow with Glenmore. I don't like liars, and I don't lose. That's why I hired him. Not because he was smart, because he had a bone to pick. 3 days later, Bryce showed up unannounced. He pulled into the vineyard in a shiny black truck he couldn't afford 2 years ago. He got out wearing aviators and a performance vest, like he'd just come from a board meeting that didn't exist. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't invite him in. We stood on the gravel drive, 10 feet apart. He said, You're tearing this family apart. I said, No, I'm just turning on the lights. He laughed. A short, clipped sound. Then he leaned in, voice low. You're not the only one with receipts, Izzy. I've got plenty of my own. I didn't blink. Then bring them to court, but just so you know, lying under oath's a felony, and you've always been a terrible liar. He left without another word. As his truck rolled away, I saw something caught in the mud flap. A half-torn parking pass from the Glenmore spa site. I took a picture. Another receipt. That weekend, I hosted a dinner on the vineyard. Just a few close friends, some loyal old neighbors, and one person I hadn't seen in years, my cousin Rachel. She worked in the county assessor's office, knew the zoning codes backwards. Over lamb and grilled peaches, she leaned in and said, I pulled the title overlays. They rezoned part of the back field as commercial without notification. That's illegal. I nodded slowly. Can you prove who filed it? She smiled. That's why I came. The next morning, I planted a new strawberry vine right next to the old one. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. A way to mark the ground, to say, I was here, I still am. When I finished, I walked back inside and opened the drawer where I kept the spare key. The old iron one from the original vineyard gate. I used to carry it on a string around my neck when I was 12. Back then, it was just something to hold. Now it meant something else. This land wasn't escape anymore. It was ownership. Later that day, I went to the Rowe family estate, knocked on the door like a stranger. My mother answered, hair done, makeup perfect, eyes sharp as ever. She said, You're not welcome here. I stepped inside anyway, walked straight to the study, the one with Dad's books still on the shelves, though no one had read them in years. I placed the ceramic teacup on the mantel and turned around. He remembered this, even when he forgot me, I said. So don't tell me he didn't want me here. She didn't speak. I looked her in the eye. You didn't raise me, you ranked me, and now I rank higher. Then I left. The hearing was coming. And they thought they were ready, but they didn't know what I'd brought with me. Not just evidence, not just witnesses, but something they'd never expect, legacy with a lock on it. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold coffee. Mark adjusted his tie while I sat still, hands folded, lips pressed. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. Nervous was for people who weren't prepared. I came with evidence, yes, but more than that, I came with memory they couldn't redact, no matter how many lawyers they hired or papers they shredded. Carol and Bryce sat at the other table, stiff in charcoal suits that didn't quite fit right. Mom arrived 10 minutes late, in pearls and a smug smile. I didn't look at her. The judge entered. The bailiff said rise. We stood. When the gavel dropped, it was the sound of glass cracking from beneath their feet. They didn't know it yet, But the fall had already started. Carol's attorney began with his voice syrup smooth. He painted them as caretakers, protectors of a legacy. They acted swiftly, he said, in the interest of the estate. Miss Rowe, Isabel, was not in a mental state to make financial decisions during her father's final days. What they did out of love and duty. I almost laughed. But I didn't. Because the more they talked, the deeper they sank. Mark stood up like he'd been waiting his whole life. "Let's talk about love," he said, and pulled up the first photo, the power of attorney filing dated 3 hours after I was sedated. Then the second, a notarized change of title with a forged signature. Then the third, Bryce's text to Glenmore's acquisition officer. "It's all clear, we'll have it wrapped in 10 days. Carol leaned forward, whispering furiously to her lawyer. Bryce's knee bounced like it was about to launch through the table. And Mom just stared, like she was waiting for someone to call cut. But this wasn't a rehearsal, it was reckoning. Then came my part. Mark asked if I'd like to speak. I nodded and stood. I didn't read from notes. I didn't bring emotion. I brought truth. I wasn't absent, I said. I was kept away. My father called me 3 times that month. I missed the first 2. The third came at 2:13 a.m. He was crying, confused. Said Carol told him I'd sold the vineyard and left the country, that I'd abandoned him. I didn't. I have the flight logs to prove I was booked to return. They canceled them behind my back. The courtroom was dead quiet. I kept going. I have receipts. I have signed statements. But what I really want to show you is this. I pulled out the ceramic teacup and placed it on the ledge of the witness box. This was my father's. He drank from it every morning. He said it reminded him of my mother, before she became someone else. He kept this cup long after it cracked. Because to him, history mattered. And this? I pointed to the legal team across the aisle. This is an attempt to erase it. Mark introduced Rachel next. She brought zoning maps, timestamps, access logs. Showed how a secret rezoning effort was linked to a shell company Bryce controlled. Showed how Glenmore had already funneled early funds, despite no legal sale. They didn't see her coming. Rachel had a calm voice and a deadly trail of documents. She laid it out like a path of breadcrumbs, and every step landed squarely at my family's feet. Then Mark showed the photo, my arm hooked around Dad's shoulder, both of us grinning at the gas station off Route 9. That wasn't just nostalgia. The metadata proved it was taken 2 days after they claimed Dad was incoherent and unfit to sign. And he was smiling, holding the key to the vineyard in his hand, the one he later gave me. Bryce stood up. "This is slander," he snapped. "We acted on legal advice. She's trying to make this personal." Mark didn't flinch. "It is personal. You didn't just try to take land. You tried to erase her from the will, from the records, from the family. You buried her right next to the man she loved." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Rowe, sit down. This isn't your turn." Bryce hesitated, then sat. The rest of the day moved like a slow unraveling. Line by line. Fraud. Coercion. Malicious interference. When we left the courthouse, Carol didn't look at me. Bryce stormed ahead. Mom stood in the hall for a moment longer, watching me like I was the ghost of something she buried. I didn't offer her a word. Not then. Back at the vineyard, I poured tea into the cracked cup. It didn't leak. 2 weeks after the verdict, the silence was louder than ever. The vineyard was mine again, legally, publicly, finally. But that didn't mean they were gone. People like them don't disappear. They just change tactics. I kept the gates locked, changed the codes, and told my team to direct all press inquiries to Mark. I didn't want headlines. I wanted peace. One morning, I found a note stuck to the front gate, tucked under a rock. No envelope. Just a single line in Carol's handwriting. "This isn't over." That was all. No signature. No context. But I didn't need context. I knew her. Carol doesn't beg. She bargains. And when bargaining fails, she poisons. That note wasn't a threat. It was a placeholder for whatever she'd try next. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I took the note, walked to the garden near the old shed, and burned it next to the tiny strawberry plant that had grown back through cracked soil. The same plant I thought had died the day I left for college. The same plant Dad once said only grew where it was loved. That plant didn't ask permission, it just came back. Later that week, Bryce tried a new angle. I got a call from a producer in Los Angeles, asking if I'd heard about a pitch. The Forgotten Daughter, based on true events in a prominent wine family in Northern California. I didn't need to ask who was shopping it. Bryce was desperate for relevance now. When legacy failed, attention would do. I declined the interview. Then I filed an injunction. Then I poured myself a glass of the reserve and wrote a letter, not to Bryce, but to the studio. I told them every detail was copyrighted, every lie was actionable, and I had no problem reminding a jury again. Mom waited longer. She always did. She knew the value of timing. She showed up at the tasting room one afternoon, dressed in a linen suit like she was hosting a benefit brunch. She stood near the window, watching me talk with guests. When I finally walked over, she smiled like nothing had happened. "You've done a lot with the place," she said. "Your father would be impressed." I didn't return the smile. "He was proud," I said, "not impressed. There's a difference." She tilted her head. "You always were sensitive." I laughed once, sharp and short. "No, I was observant. That's why I saw what you were doing long before the papers did." Her face tightened. "I never wanted it to go this far," she said. "We're family. We can fix this." I looked at her, really looked. She still wore Dad's wedding ring, still wore the perfume he hated, still acted like love meant leverage. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "You didn't try to fix it. You tried to erase me. Now you want mercy because the plan didn't work. But I'm not your project, and this place isn't your fallback." I handed her a bottle of the first vintage we made together, 2012, Roe Signature Series. "You can keep this as a souvenir, but don't come back here, not unless you're ready to admit what you did." She left without another word. That night, I stood alone in the barrel room. Cool air, dim lights, wood and metal and silence. I reached into the drawer by the old filing cabinet and pulled out the key Dad gave me that day at the gas station, the one he held with shaking hands and a smile that didn't match his body. It had a rusted edge and a faded tag. Storage, Talker 12. I hadn't looked. Not yet. But I was ready now. The storage facility hadn't changed. Same chipped beige paint. Same keypad with a delayed beep. Unit number 12 was tucked at the end of the second row, shaded by an overgrown oak. I slipped the key into the lock. It stuck for a second, then gave with a soft metallic click, like the sound of someone exhaling after holding their breath too long. The door creaked open, and I flipped on the overhead light. There wasn't much inside. 2 wooden crates, an old metal chair, and a small filing cabinet. No dramatic reveal. No hidden treasure, just dust and restraint. But that's how my father operated. Never flashy, always deliberate. One of the crates had my name on it, A. Marsh, written in black marker, faded but still legible. I opened it slowly. Inside were 6 bottles of wine, all from the years I'd been away. He had saved one from each vintage, even during the years I thought he'd forgotten me. Beneath the bottles, wrapped in linen, was the old porcelain teacup, the one I broke when I was 9, crying because Carol had thrown out my art portfolio. He'd glued it back together with epoxy and patience. I never saw it again, until now. I sat on the metal chair and held it in both hands. The cracks were still visible, but the shape held. That cup wasn't just a memento. It was a message. He remembered. He'd kept it when no one else had. They could rewrite his will, forge signatures, sell stories to magazines, but they couldn't touch this. This was mine. The second crate was heavier. I pried it open and found stacks of manila folders, financial statements, contracts, copies of letters. At the very bottom was a sealed envelope, thick, heavy. My name was typed on the front in all caps. I opened it and pulled out a letter. It wasn't long, just 3 paragraphs. Dad explained that he'd suspected what Carol and Bryce were planning, that he'd been advised to set up a trust in my name, offshore, in case things turned ugly. He'd transferred the vineyard's original deed into it years ago, and only revealed its existence to his lawyer in the final months of his life. The document was included, signed, notarized, bulletproof. It wasn't about money, it was about clarity, about legacy. He wrote, "They wanted what I built. You became who I built it for." I read that line again and again, the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't sentiment, it was recognition. And it felt like a door had quietly closed behind me, sealing away every moment I'd questioned whether he saw me. He did. All along. I spent the rest of the evening reading. Mark stopped by around 8, saw the light on, and offered takeout. I told him everything, showed him the deed, the letter, even the cup. He didn't say much, just nodded and placed the takeout on the cabinet. Then he handed me a flash drive. "I found this in Bryce's office," he said. "Thought you'd want to see it." The drive contained audio recordings, voicemails between Bryce and a tabloid editor, discussions of payouts, fabrication, and most damningly, Dad's deteriorating health. Bryce had sold the lie that Dad was mentally unfit, trying to undercut the trust before it ever surfaced. The tapes were time-stamped. The voice was unmistakable. I copied them to 3 places: my laptop, a private cloud, and one marked drive locked in the estate safe. Then I contacted my lawyer. We filed defamation charges within 48 hours. I didn't care if it never reached court. I just wanted the truth documented, preserved, undeniable. By the weekend, local press caught wind of the reversal. Bryce denied everything, of course. Carol refused to comment. But silence doesn't clean fingerprints, and evidence doesn't blink. The last thing I did was walk the perimeter of the vineyard with the deed in one hand and Dad's key in the other. I paused by the east fence, where the strawberries had started spreading, wild, untamed. A small cluster peeked out from under the fencing. I knelt and touched one. Ripe, not planted, not tended, just growing. I stood up, slid the key onto a new ring with the house key, and locked the front gate behind me. The letter arrived on a Thursday. A formal invitation, cream cardstock, gold edges, scripted font. "You are cordially invited to the annual Marsh Family Harvest Celebration." The gall. Carol had printed my name at the top, like she'd conjured me from thin air. She even added a line: "Please consider this a moment for healing." I didn't respond. I RSVP'd with my presence. The morning of the event, I walked up the hill from the workers' cottages, where I'd been living since the trust was finalized. The sun was high, the grapes nearly ready for pressing. Bryce had tried to fast-track everything this season. The wine would be unbalanced. Like him, rushed, bloated, sour. Guests were gathering under the arbor, sipping early pours and pretending they knew soil from sentiment. Carol stood near the stone fountain, wearing the same coral dress she wore at Dad's memorial. All fake softness and pearl teeth. She didn't spot me at first, but Bryce did. He froze mid-pour, a drop of rosé splashing his cuff. I walked straight to the center table, the long reclaimed wood piece Dad built himself. My name wasn't on any of the cards, of course not, but I didn't sit. I placed the porcelain teacup, my teacup, dead center of the table. No words, just porcelain and silence. It took them 3 full minutes to understand what it meant. Then Carol stepped forward. "Adeline," she said, voice syrupy. "We didn't know you'd be attending." I smiled. "I wasn't invited. I was summoned." She blinked. "That wasn't the intention." "No," I said. "But that's always been the problem, hasn't it? You don't see intent. You see leverage." Her lips thinned. Bryce stepped in. "We thought maybe we could start over. Family again." "Family," I said. "You forged documents to erase me. You called me unstable in court declarations. You leaked fabricated emails to the press. You don't want family, you want control. And now you have none." He looked away. I didn't. Mark arrived then, flanked by 2 security officers and a notary. I handed over the trust deed. The press had already gotten a copy. Carol's hand trembled slightly. Her coral sleeve sagged. Bryce tried to speak, but I cut him off. "You didn't raise me. You ranked me. You put me below property lines and press coverage. And now I'm the one holding the deed." Gasps. No applause. This wasn't theater. It was reckoning. I turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the courtyard. "You built this table," I said, "but you never gave me a seat, so I built my own. And now I choose who eats." Back at the cottage, I brewed tea and poured it into the repaired porcelain cup. The cracks had held, just like me. Outside, the strawberries had crept past the stones and started climbing the porch steps. I didn't stop them. I simply opened the door and let them grow. If you're still here, thank you for walking through every broken step and every locked door with me. This wasn't just a story about a vineyard or a trust fund or a porcelain cup. This was about the seat at the table we're told we don't deserve, and what happens when we claim it anyway. They tried to rewrite my worth, silence my voice, fold me back into their narrative. But sometimes survival means burning the script and writing your own. If you've ever been cast aside by the people who were supposed to love you, I hope you remember this. You are not disposable. You are not a footnote in someone else's legacy. You get to take up space. You get to say, I'm here and I'm not asking anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you or reminded you of your own journey, I invite you to share it with a friend in the comments or just silently with yourself. Because healing doesn't always start with closure. Sometimes it starts with telling the truth out loud. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stand your ground, hold your cup tight, and let the strawberries grow.